I want to tell you about the moment my life split in half, but first, I need you to understand who I was before everything fell apart. Because people like to believe single mothers are born strong, like we arrive in the world already knowing how to survive abandonment. That's not true. I was soft once. I believed in permanence. I believed love stayed where it was planted. I grew up believing that if you love someone hard enough, they wouldn't leave. That was the lesson my childhood taught me, even though it probably shouldn't have. I was raised in a small town where people waved from porches and everyone knew everyone's business. My mother stayed, no matter what. My father worked too much and spoke too little, but he came home every night. In my young mind, that was the definition of stability. I thought that was how life worked. You build something and then you protect it. So when I fell in love, I fell all the way in. I loved like someone who had never been warned. When I got pregnant, I was scared, yes, but I was also hopeful. I imagined late nights rocking a baby together. I imagined shared exhaustion, shared laughter, shared responsibility. I imagined a future that required two people and believed we would be those two people. I didn't know then that imagining a future doesn't mean the other person is imagining it with you. The baby came into the world, crying and perfect and fragile, and I remember looking at that tiny face and thinking, this is the most serious thing I will ever do. I didn't know it would also be the loneliest. 3 months later, my body was still healing. My hormones were still raging. I was still learning how to be a mother. I still flinched every time the baby cried, afraid I would do something wrong. And that was when he left. Not during a fight, not after a long conversation, just one morning where everything felt slightly off, like the air was too quiet. He packed a bag. He avoided eye contact. He said he couldn't do this anymore. And just like that, the future I thought was guaranteed became something I had to mourn. I stood there holding a baby who didn't understand absence yet, and I realized something terrifying. There would be no one else to hand this responsibility to. No break, no backup, no relief. If you're watching this right now, I want you to tell me where you're watching from. Not because it matters geographically, but because it reminds me that stories like this don't happen in isolation. They happen everywhere. The first weeks alone felt unreal, like I was playing a role I hadn't auditioned for. I remember pacing the apartment at night, bouncing a baby who refused to sleep, whispering, please, 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 like sleep, was something I could negotiate. I remember checking my phone over and over, even though it never rang. I remember thinking, any minute now, he'll realize what he's done. But days passed, then weeks, then months. Hope didn't leave all at once. It faded slowly like a bruise changing color. Reality came with bills, rent notices, empty cupboards, the sharp awareness that love does not pay for formula. I learned quickly that survival requires math, calculating costs, calculating energy, calculating how much of yourself you can give before you collapse. I went back to work too soon. My body wasn't ready, but poverty doesn't care about recovery. I left my baby with a sitter I couldn't afford and trusted anyway because I had no choice. Every shift felt like betrayal. Every goodbye felt heavier than the last. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from being needed constantly while feeling invisible. Customers smiled at me without seeing me. Coworkers complained about their weekends. I nodded and pretended I remembered what rest felt like. At night, After feeding and rocking and pacing and shushing, I would sit alone in the dark and think about how quiet abandonment is. No explosions, no warnings, just absence. And the worst part wasn't missing him. The worst part was realizing my child would grow up missing something they never chose to lose. If this story is touching something in you, don't just listen, stay. Stories like this unfold slowly because healing does too. The baby grew. So did the weight of responsibility. Crawling turned into walking, walking turned into running. Every milestone was bittersweet, joy layered with grief, pride mixed with resentment. I clapped and cheered and took photos, then cried later when no one could see me. People like to say, children don't notice absence. They do. They feel it before they can name it. When the questions started, they came softly at first. Where's my dad? Why doesn't he come? Did I do something wrong? Those questions live in your chest forever. You never forget the first time you have to explain abandonment without shattering a child's sense of worth. I became careful with my words. I became careful with my emotions. I learned how to cry silently. I learned how to smile through pain. I learned how to be strong in ways that don't look heroic, but are. And this is only the beginning. I didn't realize at the time that childhood doesn't just happen to children. It happens to parents too. It reshapes you. It exposes every crack in you. And when you're doing it alone, those cracks feel wider, louder, harder to hide. My child learned how to talk while I was learning how to lie gently. Not the kind of lies meant to deceive, but the kind meant to protect. The kind that says everything will be okay when you're not sure it will. The kind that says your dad loves you even when love has been defined by absence. Mornings became military operations. Wake up before the sun. Pack lunches with whatever we had. Tie shoes while answering questions about spelling words and why the sky is blue. I learned how to multitask in ways that still don't make sense to me when I think about it now. I learned how to be fully present while completely exhausted. I remember the first day of kindergarten. My child stood there with a backpack almost as big as their body, eyes wide, nervous, excited. Other kids were surrounded by parents, two hands holding theirs, cameras flashing. I stood alone, smiling too big, pretending my chest didn't hurt. When the teacher said, "You can go now," my child looked back just once. That look said everything. Are you still here? Are you leaving too? I stayed in the parking lot for 10 minutes after, crying into the steering wheel, then wiped my face and went to work like nothing had happened. That became a pattern. Cry, wipe your face, keep going. Money was always tight, not sometimes, always. There was never a cushion, never savings, just enough to get through the month if nothing went wrong, and something always went wrong. A car repair, a medical bill, a school fee I hadn't planned for. I learned how to juggle debt like a second job. I learned which bills could wait and which ones couldn't. I learned how to live with the constant hum of anxiety in my chest. There's a specific shame that comes with poverty that people don't talk about. It's not just about not having enough. It's about feeling like you're failing publicly, like everyone can see what you can't provide. I felt it standing in line with food assistance cards. I felt it when my child asked for things I couldn't afford. I felt it when permission slips came home asking for money I didn't have. I started saying no a lot. No to field trips, No to brand name shoes. No to birthday parties that required gifts I couldn't buy. Every no felt like a small betrayal, even though I knew it wasn't. At night, after homework and dinner and baths, when my child finally slept, I would lie awake replaying the day in my head, cataloging my mistakes. Did I yell too much? Did I miss something important? Did they feel loved today? Single motherhood teaches you how to doubt yourself constantly. The questions from other adults never stopped. Teachers asked about emergency contacts. Doctors asked about family history. Forms asked for father's name. Each blank space felt like an accusation. I learned how to answer quickly so no one would linger on the absence. I learned how to joke about it sometimes because humor makes people more comfortable than truth. As my child grew older, the world became less forgiving. Children notice differences. They ask questions. They repeat things they hear at home. My child came home once and asked me why someone said they were fatherless. That word felt heavier than it should have. I wanted to tear it apart and redefine it, but instead I hugged my child and told them they were loved, deeply, fiercely, completely. I don't know if they believed me then. I worked harder, took extra shifts, pushed myself past exhaustion. I told myself that if I could just provide enough, be enough, then maybe the absence wouldn't matter as much. That's the lie a lot of single parents tell themselves. That love can replace loss entirely. But loss leaves shadows. Middle school was when the anger started, not constant, just enough to keep me on edge. Doors slammed harder, words cut deeper. I recognized it immediately because I felt it too. Anger is easier than sadness. Anger feels powerful when grief feels helpless. There were nights my child yelled at me, blamed me, said things they didn't fully understand yet. And instead of defending myself, I listened because I knew the anger wasn't really about me. It was about an empty space they didn't know what to do with. If you've ever been yelled at by a child you sacrificed everything for, tell me in the comments. That pain deserves witnesses. I wanted to tell them the truth sometimes. I wanted to say he chose to leave. He chose himself. He chose freedom over responsibility. But I held back because once you put that weight on a child, you can never take it back. So I carried it instead. Teenage years stretched me thinner than I thought possible. My child was growing into themselves, questioning everything, pushing boundaries, trying to figure out who they were in a world that had already taken something from them. I tried to give guidance without control, support without suffocation. It's harder than it sounds. There were nights I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had done enough, wondering if staying had actually been enough to counterbalance leaving. I was so tired, not just physically, soul tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. And yet, there were moments, small ones, quiet ones, moments that kept me going, late night talks where my child opened up, shared jokes in the car, random hugs that came out of nowhere, proof that something good was growing despite everything. 16 years is a long time to carry silence. It becomes familiar, you stop expecting disruption, you build a life around absence so thoroughly that it feels permanent. That's why the phone call shattered me. When his name appeared on the screen, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. My hands shook. My heart raced. 16 years of emotional containment cracked open in an instant. He said hello like we'd spoken yesterday. He said he'd been thinking about us. He said time had given him perspective. He said he wanted to make things right, as if time were something you could repay, as if missed childhoods were debts you could settle. I listened quietly, because screaming wouldn't give me back the years, because rage wouldn't undo what was done. After I hung up, I sat there in silence, realizing something terrifying. I had built my entire life around the idea that he was gone, and now he wasn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought about every version of myself I had been over 16 years. The scared young mother, the exhausted provider, the woman who learned how to survive without softness. I thought about what his return might take from me, from my child. I thought about forgiveness, not the kind people talk about online, the real kind, the kind that costs something. And I realized forgiveness isn't just about letting go of anger. It's about deciding whether someone deserves access to the life you protected without them. If you're still here, stay with me, because the hardest part is coming. I didn't tell my child right away, not because I was hiding anything, but because I needed time to understand what his return meant before I let it touch the life I had built so carefully. You don't invite a storm into a house you spent 16 years reinforcing without checking the foundation first. For days, I carried the knowledge alone. I went through routines like normal: work, dinner, homework, small talk, laughter at the right moments. But inside, I was unraveling quietly. Every memory I had boxed away suddenly felt close enough to touch. Every old wound began to ache like weather was changing. I found myself thinking about things I hadn't allowed myself to think about in years. What if he had stayed? What if things had been different? Those questions are dangerous. They don't lead anywhere good. They only open doors you fought hard to close. When I finally told my child, I chose honesty without cruelty. I said their father had reached out. I said he wanted to talk. I said there were no decisions yet. I watched the information land. At first, there was nothing, just a quiet stillness, then confusion, then questions, so many questions. Where has he been? Why now? Does he want me? Is it my fault he left? That one nearly broke me. I told my child the truth then, the simplest truth. No child causes abandonment, ever. That night, I heard crying through the bedroom door. The kind of crying that isn't loud, just deep. The kind that comes from a place words can't reach yet. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall, hands clenched, because I knew if I went in there, I might shatter too. Single motherhood teaches you when to be strong and when to step back. This was one of those moments where love meant giving space, even though every instinct told me to hold on tighter. The meeting was scheduled for a neutral place, public, controlled, safe. I chose a coffee shop because it felt ordinary, and I needed ordinary to balance the weight of 16 years. When I saw him walk in, my first thought surprised me. He looked smaller, not physically, emotionally, like someone who had lived a long time with regret and hadn't figured out how to put it down. He smiled, like familiarity still existed between us. That hurt more than if he'd been distant. We sat, we spoke, or rather, he spoke. He told stories about his life, about things he'd missed, about mistakes he'd made, about how hard it had been for him. I listened, because listening costs less than interrupting. And then he cried. I didn't. That's something no one prepares you for. The moment when the person who left finally breaks and you realize you already did your breaking years ago. He apologized over and over. He said he was scared back then. He said he wasn't ready. He said he hated himself for leaving. I believed that he believed those things. But belief doesn't equal forgiveness. What he didn't say was the most important part. He didn't say how he'd lived 16 years without checking in. He didn't explain how you forget a child exists. He didn't explain how absence becomes a habit. When it was over, we stood up awkwardly, like strangers who shared history, but no present. I shook his hand. That felt appropriate. He looked surprised by that. On the drive home, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. Not from fear, from exhaustion. Emotional labor is heavy, especially when you've already carried more than your share. That night, my child asked if they could meet him. I said yes, because no matter how I felt, this wasn't just my story. Their meeting was harder than mine. Children don't have the same emotional armor adults build. There's no distance, no filter, just raw longing colliding with reality. I watched my child sit across from a stranger who shared their face. I watched hope flicker and falter in real time. I watched 16 years of imagined reunions fail to match the reality of a man who didn't know their favorite color, their fears, their humor. Afterward, my child was quiet for days. Not angry, not loud, just withdrawn. That scared me more than rage ever could. One night, they asked me if something was wrong with them, if they were hard to love, if that's why he left. That question cut deeper than any bill, any sleepless night, any sacrifice I had made. I held them then, tighter than I had in years. I told them the truth again, slower this time, that adults make choices based on their own limitations, that leaving is about the one who leaves, not the one who is left. But even as I said it, I wondered if words were enough. I started questioning myself in new ways. Had I protected too much? Had I waited too long? Had my silence helped or hurt? Single parents are always second-guessing, always carrying the weight of outcomes that were never fully in their control. The calls continued. Messages, apologies, requests for more time, more chances. And then came the pressure from him, from others, from society itself. People love redemption stories. They love the idea that time heals everything. They love neat endings where everyone forgives and moves on. They don't love the complexity of consequences. I was told to be the bigger person, to think of my child, to let go of the past, but no one asked who held the past while everyone else lived their lives. If you're watching this, I want you to answer honestly. Is forgiveness something people earn, or something we, because I realized something during those weeks of indecision. I wasn't angry anymore. I was protective of the peace I had built, protective of a child who had already survived one abandonment, protective of myself because healing once almost destroyed me. And then came the moment that changed everything. One sentence, one quiet admission, and that's where I'll stop for now, because this is the point where everything shifts. The sentence came quietly, not during an argument, not in a dramatic confession, just slipped into a conversation like it didn't carry the weight of 16 years. He said he had assumed we'd be fine without him. That was it. No cruelty in his voice, no malice, just honesty. And in that moment, something inside me finally cracked open all the way. Because I realized then that his absence wasn't caused by fear or confusion or immaturity alone. It was sustained by comfort, by the belief that I would handle it, that I would compensate, that I would absorb the damage. And I did. Single mothers always do. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't confront him the way movies teach you to. I went quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I suddenly understood everything I needed to understand. I understood why the apologies felt hollow, why the timing felt wrong, why the return felt intrusive instead of healing. He didn't come back because he finally understood what he'd done. He came back because he finally felt safe enough to. That realization changed the way I saw the last 16 years, not as a tragedy, but as a testament. I hadn't survived because he was gone. I survived because I stayed, because I didn't assume someone else would pick up the pieces. I thought about every time I showed up sick because there was no one to trade shifts with. Every night I stayed awake worrying about money. Every moment I swallowed my fear so my child wouldn't feel it. I thought about the cost of being reliable, the cost of being the one who never leaves. People praise strength, but they rarely ask what it costs the person being strong. After that conversation, I stopped responding immediately. I slowed everything down because boundaries are built with intention, not impulse. My child noticed. They asked questions. They watched me closely like they always had, learning how to handle pain by watching how I handled it. And that terrified me more than anything else, because I knew whatever choice I made would teach them something about love, about forgiveness, about self-respect. We talked slowly, honestly, over days, over weeks. Conversations that started cautiously and ended in tears. Conversations where my child admitted they were angry at both of us, at him for leaving, at me for staying quiet for so long. I listened because this wasn't about defending my choices anymore. It was about acknowledging their pain. One night, my child asked me if I ever hated him. I told them the truth. I told them I hated the choice he made. I hated the absence. I hated the nights I cried alone. But I didn't hate him, because hate would have taken too much energy I needed to survive. Then my child asked if I regretted staying. That question felt heavier than all the others combined. I told them no, not because it was easy, not because it was noble, but because staying built something real. Staying built us. I saw something shift in my child after that. Not relief, not closure, but understanding. The kind that comes when you realize someone didn't save you, but they stood between you and the worst of it. When I spoke to him again, I was calm. That surprised him. I told him that reconciliation isn't a feeling, it's a responsibility, and responsibility doesn't start with regret, it starts with consistency. I told him that showing up now didn't erase leaving then, that access to our lives wasn't guaranteed, that rebuilding trust wasn't a right, it was a process. He asked what he could do, and for the first time, I didn't give him instructions, because for 16 years, I had done all the doing. I told him the truth he wasn't expecting, that my child didn't need another promise, that I didn't need another apology, that what we needed most was stability. And stability comes from people who show up even when it's uncomfortable. I told him that if he wanted to be present, it would have to be slow, on our terms, with no expectations of forgiveness, with no pressure for closeness, with no rewriting of history. I told him that love that arrives late doesn't get to rush the healing. He listened. I don't know if he truly understood. Understanding takes time, but for the first time, he didn't argue. After that, something unexpected happened. Peace, not relief, not happiness. Peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop negotiating with the past. I realized I didn't need him to validate my struggle. I didn't need him to acknowledge my sacrifices. I didn't need his presence to justify my pain, because my life already told that story. And I realized something else too. I wasn't afraid of him leaving again. I was afraid of letting someone disrupt the life I had protected so fiercely. That's what abandonment teaches you. Not distrust, self-preservation. If you're still listening, stay with me. Because the ending isn't what people expect. Time didn't suddenly heal everything after that. Life rarely works that way. What changed wasn't the past, but how much power it had over the present. He didn't disappear again. I'll give him that. He showed up in small, careful ways. Messages instead of demands. Questions instead of assumptions. Silence when silence was needed. It wasn't redemption, it was effort. And effort, while not forgiveness, is something you can measure. Still, trust didn't rush in. Trust doesn't sprint toward people. Who taught you how to live without it? My child watched everything, every interaction, every pause before I answered a call, every breath I took before responding. Children learn not from what you say, but from what you tolerate. I knew that. I had always known that. There were days my child wanted more from him, more time, more connection. There were days they wanted nothing at all. I didn't push either direction. I let them lead, even when it hurt to watch the confusion play out on their face. Healing is messy. It doesn't follow a schedule. It doesn't respect comfort. There was one afternoon, months later, when my child came home quieter than usual. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where homework had been done and bills had been paid and life had unfolded piece by piece. They asked me if I ever wondered who I would have been if things had been different. That question landed softly but carried weight. I told them the truth. That yes, sometimes I wondered. But that wondering didn't mean regret. It meant curiosity, and curiosity doesn't erase reality. I told them that the version of me who survived was not weaker than the version who dreamed, just different, sharper, more grounded, less naive. I told them that pain had changed me, but it hadn't ruined me. And then they said something I'll carry forever. They said they were proud of me, not grateful, not relieved. Proud. That was the moment I realized something profound. I had spent 16 years worrying I wasn't enough, and somehow I had been more than enough. The reconciliation never became a fairy tale. There was no dramatic reunion, no sudden family portrait, no erased history. What it became instead was something quieter, something truer. He existed at the edges, slowly, carefully, on probation with time, and that was okay, because my life was no longer built around his absence or his presence. It was built around what I had created. There is a myth that single mothers are broken women raising broken children. I believed that myth once, in my weakest moments. But I know better now. What I see instead are women forged by responsibility. Women who learn to operate heavy emotional machinery without instruction manuals. Women who learn how to hold grief in one hand and love in the other without dropping either. I see children who grow up observant, emotionally aware, strong in ways that don't always show up on report cards. If you're a single parent listening to this, I want you to hear me clearly. Your exhaustion is valid. Your anger is understandable. Your love matters more than you know. And if you're someone who left, who walked away from something you helped create, I want you to hear this too. Returning doesn't undo leaving. Apologies don't replace years, and reconciliation is not something you ask for. It's something you earn slowly, quietly, without expectation. As for me, I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I tell it because silence keeps people believing they're alone, and no one survives abandonment better believing that. I still have moments where the weight hits me, moments where I see old photos and remember how young I was, moments where I grieve the version of myself that didn't know what was coming. But I also have moments of deep pride. Pride that I stayed when it was easier to disappear. Pride that I showed up even when no one was watching. Pride that I taught my child what commitment looks like by living it. If you're still here, if you've listened all the way to this point, I want to ask you something. Do you believe forgiveness should be automatic, or do you believe it should be earned? Tell me in the comments. I read them, I sit with them, and sometimes they heal parts of people you'll never meet. And before you go, answer this too. Where are you watching from? Because somewhere out there, a single mother is pacing a floor at midnight, holding a crying baby, wondering if she's strong enough. If this story reaches her, then every word was worth it. And if you're that mother, you are stronger than you know.